We are back with Build 617 on a mission to publicly explore the what ifs, why nots, what nows, and how to's of making Boston the best place in the world for entrepreneurs to build and stay. Today's guest is Eric Paley, our current Secretary of Economic Development for the Commonwealth and past Managing Director of Founder Collective and Founder CEO of 3M Brontes Technologies. We want to give a special shout out to Roe and Link Ventures for sponsoring the podcast and for donating the space.
Founder Collective has backed some of the most iconic startups of the last decade, including Uber, Suno, and Trade Desk. But what makes Eric especially interesting for this conversation is that he has seen company building from three completely different angles. He was a founder, a longtime investor, and now he serves in government helping shape economic development and innovation policy. Eric, welcome to Build 617.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're pumped. So you've seen company building from these three angles, right? Founder, investor, and now public operator. Whether it's linear or whether it's nonlinear, like from each of these chapters, how has it changed your thinking about what builds like enduring companies?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. Companies are built on the ground floor. Founders are living on the ground floor. The problem with venture capital and the challenge of venture capital is it's abstracted. It's up at 30,000 feet. And very often VCs start to believe they see patterns that are really just because they're too abstracted. So they actually don't understand what's actually happening on the ground. I think one of our challenges in government is we're even more abstracted, right? Yeah. We're looking across a whole economy and trying to understand what's happening and what works. And so unfortunately, I think the only way to kind of overcome that is to kind of keep diving back down on the ground level and really try to understand what's happening down there. I think the challenge as an entrepreneur is you're 100% deep on what you're working on, right? You're not at all wide. You're just so deep, right?
You better be deep.
Right. And that's
be focused.
Totally. And that's what allows you to win is that concentration of attention, but you don't necessarily have this bigger view. Yeah. VCs have this strength because they have this bigger view, but they don't have any of the depth. Yeah. And then I'd say government, it's even bigger, right? My job goes well beyond just the innovation economy. We have to look at Massachusetts as a global economy. How does that operate? But you become disconnected from what works on the ground. And so just trying to understand that reality and engage that and try to go back to just classic, like what does customer discovery really look like about what affects the innovation economy or small businesses or municipalities? That's kind of where I am right now. And I tried to do the same as a VC, but you have to remind yourself over and over again that you think you see things that until you get back down there, you really don't know what they look like.
Yeah. Can I ask like a silly question? Just for my own knowledge, like when you say innovation economy, what all is included? Like I think we're included. Like we're
totally
technology startup founders. I think we're part of that. But like what broader? Like who all is included in that?
I don't think that's a silly question at all.
Oh, good.
I think innovation economy is actually very broad in our minds.
Okay.
It's everything from tech where you guys live, AI where you guys live, but also life sciences. I'd say a broad set of things called tough tech, which includes life sciences, but also climate tech. It can be software or AI at much more foundational levels, but as you get to more of the application layer, you wouldn't necessarily think of that the same way as tough tech, right? We do have an incredible climate economy. That is definitely a big part of that. But I'd also say advanced manufacturing. So now you might think of that a little less as classically innovation economy, but we have businesses in the state who are doing unbelievable work, not just building tools for advanced manufacturing, but implementing advanced manufacturing in ways that change the game for how their businesses operate. And we think of that as part of the innovation economy. Quantum is an interesting part of the innovation economy. We have real strength in fintech, which gets back to software. But so there are a lot of overlapping layers to all these things. And I actually think one of the things we should talk about a little today is how AI brings all of this together. It's really creating convergence across all these different sectors. I left out robotics. I mean, there's so much to talk about that is part of the innovation economy. I think what's been very broadening for me is, I was in your world much more. I didn't spend a lot of time in life sciences. We did some climate stuff. We didn't do a lot of climate stuff. And advanced manufacturing, we did it on the tool side with companies like Tulip and Formlabs, but not necessarily on, seeing manufacturing-oriented companies bring new technologies to bear to really accelerate their success. So I'm getting to see a lot of things, again, this very wide, broad view, but it's very important that, with that wide view, I don't assume I start to understand what's actually happening at the ground level. I have to go down there to understand that. So if you want to talk about biotech, I really need to spend time with the biotech entrepreneurs, the companies that are scaling, the industry at large to understand what, for example, at the Mass Life Sciences Center, which I chair, what really makes a difference and an impact on that economy.
Yeah, super helpful. I feel like I had some intuition. It's like, oh, roughly there's a lot of innovation happening, but like what all is included in that? And I think
it's a broad scope.
It's a broad scope.
And I think one of the interesting things is certain towns are much more company towns around very specific sectors.
Yeah.
We're actually very broad across our innovation ecosystem. And to me, that's one of the real gifts of the university system, right?
Yeah.
There's curiosity building into learning and research in every domain you could ever imagine, from healthcare policy to education policy to life sciences to robotics to drone delivery to, right? We didn't talk about defense. That's another huge sector. And so those academic institutions are so incredibly broad and bring in so much research money around all those areas that we excel in numerous areas, but we are not a single industry town. We really, our community or state, we're very, very broad in what we're able to deliver.
Yeah, I used to live in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's just like insurance and Pratt & Whitney.
Yep.
Like that's what you got. You're either doing turbines or you're doing insurance. And it is exciting and I guess easy to take for granted that Boston, diversity of innovation is.
Yeah, and I'd say it's across the state. I mean, we definitely,
you're right.
Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, they're part of the heartbeat and nobody's ever going to deny that. But you visit other parts of the state and you see strengths you wouldn't have expected. So like Worcester is now a top 20 life sciences ecosystem. I think that's pretty phenomenal, right?
Top 20. I mean, that's huge.
Springfield has an ecosystem budding around supply chain for quantum. Pittsfield has an ecosystem budding around optics that is really a corridor all the way from Rochester to Boston around optical technology. So, and we've been investing in these core areas around the state. I was in New Bedford yesterday. They have a growing economy around blue ocean technologies. With some really exciting things happening. So it depends where you go in the state. Obviously, again, nobody's ever going to deny that Boston, Cambridge, Somerville are uniquely strong. This morning, I was in Watertown talking about their life sciences sector because they're now the third biggest in biotech in particular. Yeah. So the core is really strong on these things, but it is spreading around the state. And when you see advanced manufacturing, you see it everywhere. Everywhere in the state has fascinating things happening around advanced manufacturing.
Yeah. It sounds like maybe in your role, it has forced you to be a little bit of a historian as well, of trying to see what used to be, what is now, how did it get there, and then
a tiny bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm much more focused on going forward.
Sure.
I mean, we can talk about the history of tech in Massachusetts and where I think we get the history a bit wrong.
Yeah.
If you're interested, but I'm much more interested in how we go forward than spending a lot of time talking about. I've been here 25 years. Oh. The 128 Silicon Valley contest was long over 25 years ago, and people are still talking about it in ways that I think detract from what's being accomplished here.
Yeah. So what has changed over the years? Maybe give me 20% on that and 80% on what we should be doing differently. Yeah,
with the caveat that I'm interested in going forward and I'm not interested so much in the history, but there are people who are still talking about the days of Apollo and the days of DEC. And somebody was telling me recently that they were at MIT in the investment office there in the late 80s and Apollo had already lost. So you think about how long ago that is, right? 40 years ago, and we're still hurting from that. And yet I don't think we really are. It's just in our psyche. And what I mean by that is there's a different narrative, right? The narrative is Massachusetts won. It didn't win as big as the Bay Area in tech, right? It certainly did in biotech, but it didn't win as big as the Bay Area in tech. Yep. But it is the number 2 place in the United States for building tech companies. And people say, well, what about New York? It's interesting. So we've been Founder Collective, the fund I was at, we've been very active investors in New York over the years. Actually, we've invested more dollars in New York and the ecosystem invests more dollars in New York than in Massachusetts. But when we run the numbers, we've outperformed New York on outcomes in Massachusetts. And even at Founder Collective, it's true. We've invested meaningfully more dollars in more companies in New York, and we have more unicorns in Massachusetts. Now, it doesn't mean New York is doing badly. They're right to be excited about their ecosystem. Things are going really well there. But here we are in Massachusetts where people constantly are talking about how our best days are behind us or we're obsessed with Silicon Valley 40 years ago. And we are a shining star, right? We're outpacing the number 3 economy that a lot of people think of as number 2 in tech that gets more dollars than we do. Right? People talk about places like Austin and Seattle. We're orders of magnitude more in outcomes than those places. Startup Nation, Israel, it's an incredible ecosystem. They've branded themselves on what they've built around startups. Massachusetts outperformed Startup Nation on outcomes. So I think it's very important. While it's good that we challenge ourselves and we're always trying to be better, and sometimes I think we succeed so much because we're so hard on ourselves, but I think we also risk creating a self-fulfilling prophecy where, because people don't understand how strong the ecosystem is, there's a real risk that talent leaves. And for numerous years, I was doing the entrepreneur in residence thing at Harvard Business School, and I would sit down with MBA students who are interested in being in tech. And I think that's good talent. I know there's debate on these things, but I think that's very good talent for the ecosystem. And they'd say, I want to go into tech. Should I move to Silicon Valley or New York? And I'd say, well, they're both great options, but have you thought about Massachusetts? And they'd say, well, are there any companies in Massachusetts? Any tech companies? And I'd be like, yeah, in fact, there are some really big ones and some really successful ones. And I think if that talent doesn't know that, we've got a real problem.
Right.
And if we're not celebrating that success, we have a real problem. I think, for example, one of the biggest tech acquisitions in history happened last year. It's a joint Israel or Tel Aviv and Massachusetts headquartered company called CyberArk. It sold for $21 billion. Nobody talks about it in Massachusetts.
That's crazy.
Huge win. I believe their Massachusetts office was bigger than their Tel Aviv office. The founder and CEO was here for many, many years. But for some reason, it's not a story we tell. We need to tell these stories.
For sure. And we've heard all the time just like celebrating the wins of local companies like happens less here.
Absolutely. There's a modesty and there's a little bit of constantly licking our wounds from something that predates my 25-year tenure in Massachusetts. And I don't get that. The other funny thing I think about tech in Massachusetts, and by the way, it permeates different parts of the economy, this sort of mood of negativity. And I can talk about that. I can give you some data around that. But one of the things I often think about as we talk about this issue is when you're thinking about building a company. So I talked about talent leaving, but founders, if they don't believe they can win here, that's a huge problem. If we're not telling those stories, that's a huge problem.
Absolutely.
If we don't believe in what we can accomplish and how great this ecosystem is, that's a real problem. And so we really need to be telling these stories. We need to be building our brand around our successes, and we need to be as proud of it as New York is in terms of their rising star, as Israel is. We massively outperformed London. They're very proud of their tech ecosystem. And I do think as AI converges across all these different sectors, we'll run into a problem too, because that tech talent is going to be valuable across all of our core sectors. And we need that talent here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, totally agree. I think one of the things that maybe concerns me the most of some of the stuff, first, I think it is right. We should hold in superposition that we're doing awesome stuff. There's even more awesome stuff we can do, right? We have to hold both of those ideas. And I think you're right to point out Boston likes to think about the things we could do.
Silicon Valley won the biggest, and we won the second biggest. And yes, their win is an order of magnitude bigger. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But Austin's been talking about building itself as a tech sector for all the years I've been in tech, and it's way, way behind, right? And we're very fortunate to be in the position we're in. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be building, shouldn't be trying to take it to another level. I think there are things we're better at than anyone in the world, and that doesn't mean we don't focus on areas that are not in the core of that, but those are strengths we should double down on. And I also think as AI emerges, we have an application layer of AI, an applied AI layer that is going to play very well to our strengths, right? If you're going to build an applied AI company in biotech, in healthcare broadly, in defense, in climate tech, in robotics, these are things where we're very uniquely strong. I very much agree with Jason Kelly's notion that where bits meets atoms. I don't know if that's exactly how he describes it. We are uniquely strong. There are very few places in the world that can play at that level, partially because we have a lot of incredible software engineers, but we also have a lot of incredible mechanical engineers. We have a lot of incredible biologists and chemists and electrical engineers. That combination of capabilities, multidisciplinary companies, we're just game changers at. And I'll give you one really interesting example that most people in tech probably don't know. But Insulet is an amazing Massachusetts story, right? It's a fascinating company, life sciences company, but they're using robotic automation. They're using software. It's an integrated device, and they basically make a digital pancreas for people who have diabetes. And they run data off a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, to understand exactly how much, it's a patch, how much glucose to deliver to the person who needs it at the right time. They have an incredible workforce here in Massachusetts, manufacturing everything here. I understand their voluntary turnover is 1%. So people love working at that company.
great.
And they have 300 open jobs right now in Acton. Right? They work with us in the Mass Life Sciences Center to in our Pathmaker program to actually develop talent. But it's a great example of software, bits, meeting atoms, changing people's lives, changing the world. We have a lot of that here in Massachusetts.
I think it's especially interesting to think about as AI and agents like go further along that curve, the computation can get like more spread out.
Yes.
Like we are both just talking about before this that we aren't writing that much more code anymore. Like
It's unnerving.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's unnerving that this is my job.
But it's the thinking.
But it's
like
awesome.
the
I mean, it's
computational-
amazing. It's like incredible in every way.
Yep.
But it is, and I think what I worry is that, as you talk about, like AI driven development as needs to be a core competency across all of the different tough techs, right? Like that has to be a piece of it. And when I think about where do I go to learn, stay current on the best, it's like X. It's like and I have my own gripes with X.
Yeah, sure.
But like I'm on there trying to curate my feed to see what everyone in San Francisco is saying because that's where the most, that's where the current is. And I'm just like, it's such an effort for me. And this is like existential for my company. If I don't do it, we don't make it.
But I would listen to San Francisco, but I wouldn't just listen to San Francisco. I think one of the things you see a lot of is San Francisco is an echo chamber at a level that nothing else is.
Yeah.
And it's usually right about a lot and wrong about a lot. So we could be talking right now about how NFTs are going to change the world. By the way, maybe they still will. Who knows?
Clubhouse.
But right, or Clubhouse can. But we chuckle about it. But Web3 was a religion. I mean, people believed it at a level that certainly currently has not come to light. The internet is not owned by the producers. I wish it was, to be completely honest. But that was a whole premise of the future of the internet and a whole new wave of technologies that were going to change everything. And, what was the last major ICO anyone's talked about? So I think we just got to be careful that one of the things we can bring to bear is a lot of sort of how does it all work in the real world? I think Massachusetts is really good at that. Sometimes it may make us a little less imaginative, right, on some level. But ultimately, things succeed because they collide with the real world. And that's something we do very, very well here is understand what does that collision look like and what's enabling of that. I wouldn't be so scared about not writing code because I think at the end of the day, anything that you can use to accelerate the production of what you do to bring your ideas into the world is really valuable. And I think you're going to see a much more sort of distributed and product-oriented future of what it means to be a software engineer than we've ever seen. I've heard many engineers over the years, some work for me, some at our companies, complain that when they were in school studying software, they got to sort of be the product leader. And then software was the way they implemented. And then they went into companies and they were product leaders. And then they kind of felt like they were like code jockeys, writing code all day, but not really getting to make a lot of those decisions. I think what we've now democratized is product leadership and systems thinking.
Yeah.
Right? You don't just do a small part of things. You don't just sit and write lines of text. It's all about and debugging, right? So much easier than it ever was before. We all had to do it, but I'm not sure that was where the highest value add is, right? If on my own writing, I never had to correct anything, that would be really nice, right? Like me rereading my writing to correct things, punctuation and it's not really where the value is, except you want it to go out and work. And so you need that. So if AI got good enough that I never had to do that, or I could have a conversation we're pretty close, and all of my thoughts could turn into a useful paper or communication, whatever is the best mode of communication, maybe it's visual. Maybe everything you describe to somebody turns into a 30-second movie trailer. That could be great. Right. Internally, we talk a lot about policy, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to convey where I'm trying to go on that topic. We were talking recently or earlier today about our incentives programs for companies, and I'm trying to get across ideas. Wouldn't it be unbelievably compelling if in 30 seconds you could capture that in a way that today we like sit and write for an hour? Right? Or convey it through many, many boring slides or through, if you do it Amazon style, a 5-page memo. But instead you could do it in a 30-second trailer. I don't know if that's really going to work, but we will see those frontiers pushed in how we communicate our thoughts, in how we convince people of things, persuade, and how we collaborate. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's like a much quicker future.
Yeah. If you can code at 10 times the speed by never writing code, I think that's a win, not a loss. And I think that will democratize access to code. Lots of small businesses that would never have been able to hire software engineers now could hire a single product person, and they might be able to do this incredible output. And I think that will democratize. I think you'll see, actually, in some ways, there will be all new opportunities opened up for people who historically were writing code.
Yeah, validate that, because I was actually one of those product people. So, before all this was going, I wasn't writing a lot of code. I was writing very minimal code. Now, now all the time. I want to come back to something you said earlier, because I think, one of the things we were pleasantly surprised about among our audience is it's a reasonable amount of undergraduates or graduates who, graduate students who are trying or are entrepreneurial or at least curious. Yep. And you mentioned earlier talking about the HBS students and being like, well, why New York? Why Boston? Or why New York? Why SF? Why not Boston? And I'd love to, give you the stage to dig in a little bit more on that and make the pitch, because I know people are listening. Yep. I want them to stay in Boston because if there's, if their company goes great and mine doesn't, I want to go join it. If theirs doesn't, I want them to come join mine. Like, we're going to do great. But, I think that's we all win from that. So I'd love to just hear, like, if I'm an undergrad today, I'm planning to move to SF, why shouldn't I?
Yeah, I think there are a few interesting things to think about. The first thing I'd say is we undermarket ourselves. So whatever perception you have, the data is just much stronger than the perception you have of where these ecosystems are. But I think the really big thing I talk about is I really believe we have the best talent ecosystem in the world. And I think the thing people have to understand is the Bay Area has extraordinary talent, but the demand is by dollars is so outpacing the supply of that talent that not only is it's hard to recruit everywhere. Everywhere where you're looking for good people, it's hard. It is so much harder in New York and the Bay Area to recruit than here. That's the problem of overcapitalization. The other thing we see here, and I don't have exact numbers on this, but I'm trying to get them, is our talent is so much more loyal. When I sold Brontes back in 2006, a long time ago, I stuck around for almost 3 years. Wow. We had 32 people when we sold the company. We grew much beyond that, but we had 32 people. When I left, I was the third person who had left the company almost 3 years after the acquisition. Wow. I don't think that's so unusual. In Massachusetts, when people like what they do and they like the team around them, including who they work for, they stay. You almost never hear anyone doing option shopping, right? Like where they say, well, I've been investing for 15 months. I've got to diversify my portfolio. But I do have companies in the Bay Area that are $100 million revenue companies. And then a WhatsApp sells for $19 billion. And the next week, they have tons of resignations of people who are like, look, I don't think this is going to be a WhatsApp. I've got to get to one of these companies where I can make extraordinary amounts of money. I would say the money culture here is just not, it is not like there. It's not obsessive about that. It's obsessive about ideas, creativity, curiosity, and building great things. And that's a great ecosystem in which to play. Right? We're also not a monoculture. You walk into a coffee shop, you hear curiosity on every topic, not just tech. Yeah. So I think, look, there is no question. The Bay Area is very special. And if you want to be in a company town, it's 100% focused on that and be inside the echo chamber. There are strengths to that. But I think there are strengths to why we're able to create certain types of companies here that are hard to create there. And I'd say you get access to a quality of teammate and cultural building around talent that is really hard to do anywhere else. I don't believe we could have successfully built Brontes elsewhere. Yeah. Oh, wow. It's another Bits meets Atoms company. Yeah.
Should, I think one of the things we've heard from some of our previous guests is that you should just go to SF, raise, and come back.
It turns out you can wire money and it doesn't really matter where you wire it. And it takes milliseconds. And I mean, I think the only thing, when Jason Kelly talks about that I would just disagree with is there is a lot of capital here. And one of the things you can get here that you don't get, I would argue you might not get it all in Silicon Valley, but also you certainly don't get it by being distant from Silicon Valley, is a lot of support. From those investors. So I do think, I think Jason would say, the investors here are conservative and you may as well just go to the Bay Area. Sure, a lot of our companies have Founder Collective raised in the Bay Area, but a lot of them built very good early syndicates here. It gets a little harder at Series A, B, C. By stage, it gets harder because we don't have as deep a capital stack. But by the way, a lot of them raised in New York. And a lot of them raised in the Bay Area, and a lot of them raised globally because they find the right part. Whoop has raised a lot of money overseas as well because they find the right partners in those economies. And so I guess I'd say the capital is very portable. That is probably not the reason to make a decision. And on some level, there's a problem in the Bay Area where if you're having trouble raising, you seem picked over. Whereas if you're in Massachusetts and you're a little less perceived as why am I seeing this opportunity, it's a little more of undiscovered country in a way for a lot of investors. So you get a little less of that sort of funny signal issue versus. The other thing I'd say is for every company who struggles to raise money in Massachusetts, it is not like all of our Bay Area companies found money growing on trees, right? The reality of startups is they're really hard to build. And when companies are struggling a little bit, it is hard to find capital. It's hard to find capital out there, and it's hard to find capital here. And I think even more than when 10 years ago, one of the challenges in VC is people are looking for such extraordinary outliers from the start. If you're not scaling like crazy or they think you're about to scale like crazy, there's a lack of interest. And I think there's a little bit more energy on the East Coast for companies that may take time to build, right? And I think most entrepreneurs should go into their company not thinking that, the goal is to raise as much money as possible, as quickly as possible. If we can't scale it extraordinarily, it isn't worth building. I think you see a lot of companies, the Bay Area may not be that interested in $100 million, $500 million outcomes, but that is, a huge success. And there aren't that many of those overall. We did a study 15 years ago at Founder Collaborative, 10 years ago, where we looked at all of the VCs by how big the exit was of the companies they created, right? Meaning every single VC who had been an operator, how big were their exits? And by the time you got to number 10, the biggest exit was like $200 million. So there's sort of a religion that is not consistent with the experience those VCs have that I think can be quite unhealthy for companies over time. And, you become this company that's a few years in and is, burned $10, $15 million, $5 million in revenue. That can be an extremely hard company to get anyone in the Bay Area to pay attention to. But I think in communities that are a little bit more long-term thinking, you can find investors.
Yeah, I think my 2 cents, at least what I've noticed from peers that have gone to SF, it's like you go there, you're like trying to find your initial customers, and like you're in Y Combinator with a bunch of other tech companies, or you got invested in by someone, and all their they're much more likely to invest you to their other portcos than they are to their LPs. Whereas my lived experience here, having raised from firms here in Boston, they're introducing me to their LPs who could be customers. And so like I've just noticed, particularly if you're building for enterprises, like you're going to get help, right? And especially if you're from a college known to maybe undermarket and undersell, that's us. That's a huge help. That's a huge help to have someone who's like willing to lend you credibility and like sell for you even to start. So I'd add that on from my lived experience.
And I think some of that brings you back to the real world, right? Building your business on the startup economy, it does work sometimes. But for a lot of YC companies, what people forget, YC is amazing, but people forget about YC is they have several hundred companies per batch. Most of them don't go that well or work out that well. And for many of them, part of the problem is the startup economy is not actually the right place to go build their business. Right. And YC particularly does well when that is a focus. Look, overall, you can't argue with YC and their success, but there is something special about being in an economy where, sort of what is Main Street, the real world, what's happening where Bits meets Atoms is really a focus.
Should we bring YC here?
I think they'd be crazy not to come here, right? So for a bunch of reasons. Same. I think there are certain innate advantages that Massachusetts has that I think would be very powerful for YC. I know they do have people on the ground and they are very interested, but I think it's a big opportunity. And I think what they do is so good that I think they'll see a whole different version of it be successful here.
Specifically around like Bits meets Atoms. Jason was big on, YC worked really well for like the undergraduate population. We're going to teach you business and go. But, we have like a huge amount of PhD students, grad students here.
That's right.
It seems like it's like an untapped
Well, and it's easier to get people to move when they're undergrads, right? When they haven't decided where to sit down roots. And Massachusetts, I'm very biased, but I really believe it's the best place to raise a family. So you get to your later 20s, early 30s, and you start to see that horizon, and you're thinking, there's no way I'm leaving. The schools are too good. It's too livable. It works too well. I'm not going anywhere, right? And so I do think there is a whole different sort of age cohort of founders that are very eager to put down those roots, and I think that's an opportunity for a group like YC.
Do you want to talk about the Mass AI Coalition? We were at the launch event. It was awesome, energetic. Haven't been in a room like that in Boston.
Yes,
I don't I suspect people think that's what it's like elsewhere. I don't think anywhere is quite like that.
Yeah.
That was.
I think what's so different from a lot of the other best events I've been in other communities is how unbelievably cohesive it was.
Yeah.
This really is a community rising together, and that hasn't really been the Massachusetts way in some ways. So I give so much credit to Ryan Durkin and Will Ahmed for really being the real sponsor behind all of that. But Ryan's done an amazing job bringing everyone together, starting to put, he and I met earlier today, starting to put together work streams where different leaders are taking responsibility for driving different work streams, identifying all the places that can make an impact. And then at the state level, part of the reason we've gotten so involved is we also have an AI hub that got created last year through the Mass Leads Act. That's a $100 million commitment to AI. Cool. And what you see is the hub and the coalition are not at all repetitive to each other. They're completely complementary. There are things that at state and government we can do really well. What we can't do well, in my opinion, is put together a grassroots effort of all the leaders in the tech community, which is where the coalition really comes in. What we can do well is drive state policy around AI. So we've done things like, first we stood up the hub, and then we stood up a compute resource for the academic community and for startups called Acre. It's actually in Holyoke, Mass, which is a really exciting place to put something like that. So that's world-class compute resource. We've then rolled out AI, and we announced it at the coalition, but to every single state employee with training. Awesome. And we're the first state in the country to do that. We've then also given, in partnership with Google, AI training tools and certification to every single resident in the state. And we're the first state to do that, saying, look, these skills are really important to your economic mobility. Anyone in the state who is looking to figure out how to advance their own skills for the workforce should learn about how to engage AI. Vibe coding is even part of that training. But to me, a resume that, you think about a small business and they see on a resume someone who has AI skills versus somebody who doesn't. And I think it's a game changer. Or you're coming out of school, hard to find your first job always. But a lot of businesses are interested in that young talent because they're hoping they're going to bring those skills into the business. And I think these are real differentiators. We're looking across our education system and thinking about how do we help accelerate AI across that. We have a pilot running that we're the first state in the country to take to that scale. So there are numerous things at a state level. We have more announcements coming that we're excited about. But the partnership between the two, I think, is going to be really powerful. And I think that coalition is a unique attribute of Massachusetts that people can look at and say, well, that's actually something really worth being a part of. And it needs to go across sector, right? I think it started with tech, that's fine. But bringing in the Jason Kellys from biotech and bringing in folks from climate tech, and it needs to go all across different sectors. We have a really exciting growing quantum community that needs to be plugged into this. Defense is really big in Massachusetts, much more so than people realize. We're a top defense sector state. Shield AI actually just reopened their Massachusetts office to scale. They have 20 employees right now, going to over 100 this year because they cannot find the talent they need in California.
And that's a good story for your earlier HBS founder, Brandon, and his section mate, Shimon from Tomorrow.io, both, they were in the same section at HBS, and it's great to hear that Shield's coming back. I didn't know that. I know they went to San Diego and DC.
And Anthropic's growing really fast here. XAI opened here. And we're going to see a lot more of this because a lot of that talent these companies need is here.
So now can we ask for some advice?
I don't know if it's worth what you're paying for.
We'll try. Well, I think Build 617 kind of came about from a little bit of a frustration. I don't know, something last fall. I'm just saying, man, it really feels like it feels like quicksand a little bit. Like the tech doesn't feel like it's cohesive. And so, Nathan, really the brainchild, started putting, getting some founders together. We've got intentionally small cohort. We started talking about it more publicly. And then out of nowhere, it felt like to us, like, oh man, this coalition is forming. And now we're in this spot where it's like, well, I love it. That's awesome. I want this coalition to succeed in every way. In the same way, we might represent a different constituency, or one that's even like from the government perspective, the Mass AI Coalition is very grassroots. From our perspective, it's like actually pretty organized and like less grassroots, right? Like maybe there's so I think part of what we're looking for is like, what is a great role for us to play, knowing that we're also full-time founders?
And I think you look across, part of the reason the coalition is so powerful is everyone there actually has a day job, right? They're practitioners of this set of technologies. And so it isn't just another sort of, organization that is trying to represent for a group of people, but they actually don't do the actual work content. It's a group that everyone's got they're experts and they bring capabilities. Are you asking for advice for Build 617 or for advice for the AI Coalition? Or
for Build 617 and how we should work with the, we want to be helpful to the coalition at the same way, at the same time, right? There might not always be times where it's like, sometimes coalitions have a tendency to, in their best form, they organize and direct.
Yes. In
their worst form, they suck up resources and then they, struggle to be organized and direct, right? And so in some sense, we've had people reaching out to us about, free office space and we want to partake and yes, use our podcast studio. We like what you're doing.
Yep.
And so we want to make sure that, we're doing right by these people that are asking us to, keep the message going. At the same time, we want to be very complimentary to the AI Coalition. Right. It's an awesome thing. And so a little bit of us is us trying to find our way of what's the most helpful way we can be, because we just love Boston. I live here, I've got kids here, there's no way I'm leaving. And Mass generally, by the way. But so I don't know, that's the advice.
I'm sitting here in your studio and you guys are taking your time to tell stories, right? And to bring voices to bear. And I think so much of life is showing up. I think it turned out, I got a lot of accolades for being a VC, for the work I did in VC. Some of it is because we got great returns. But some of it is really, I think, because we always tried to show up for the founders. We took very seriously our job of showing up for the founders and showing up for the community. I think I was tapped for this job because of how committed I was to showing up. And anyone on my team will tell you, I am all over the state all the time trying to show up and support. And I think there's something when you see good leadership, getting behind it and figuring out what unique capabilities you can bring to support that leadership is itself an important and powerful act. Yep. So I look around the studio and what I think to myself is you can play a huge role in just telling these stories and getting behind, if this leadership keeps growing and driving the way it is, getting behind it by telling the stories of the people doing this, bringing positivity to it. It's okay to be hard on ourselves. I don't mean that we shouldn't be, but let's make sure we're also telling all the good stories. Yeah. They're really important. Whoop is one of the most interesting AI companies right now, in my opinion, in the whole tech ecosystem. We have to be telling that story. People say you can't do consumer in Massachusetts. Whoop shows that wrong. Suno shows that isn't true. ButcherBox shows that isn't true. Nobody even knew Simply Safe was in Massachusetts. But that's a company that shows it isn't true, right? So I think it is very important. I started a series back when I was a venture capitalist in the early years called Founder Dialogues, trying to tell the story of the very best founders. We had the Wayfair founders on there, the HubSpot founders on there. It wasn't a podcast, it was a live event. Yeah. But we had Steve Kaufer, who founded TripAdvisor. But I think people hearing these stories is what brings people together and creating the positive energy around all the good things that are happening and celebrating that success. If we have a really great exit in the community, get that person on this podcast and talk about the learnings, the success of that story. I do think people being aware of these things and learning matters. You market your podcast, you probably think you're marketing your content platform. But I also think one of the things you're doing by doing that is you're sharing to the community more and more learning, right? Yeah. When we got into, at Founder Collective, our content and community platform, I used to say we have to first and foremost think of this as an educational platform. We are here to help people learn and educate how to build better startups. If that helps accrue value to the Founder Collective brand, great. But it has to first and foremost be about education, right? When we started Collective Future, which is a big event we run every single year, or the team runs, I'm not there anymore, but I'm one of the co-hosts still. That's all about getting the leaders in the community together to shape the future that we want to see together. Again, that's everyone showing up together, coming together, and actually the AI Coalition was advanced a lot in last year's Collective Future event. Oh, wow. So creating those forums, taking agency of everyone's role in contributing and coming together, those are very impactful things. And getting behind great leadership, people will get behind what you guys are doing to support it. I mean, part of the reason I said yes to being on the podcast is because I love that you guys are doing this, and I think it's great.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Yeah, and we appreciate the time you're spending with us. We won't use too much of it. I think I would love to talk a little bit more around some of the government-specific things.
Sure.
And I think at the AI Coalition launch event, you mentioned government's not going to do this, right? We're gonna help the garden, be fertile, right? Yes. But the plants have to grow, or something to that effect. And it really resonated because it was days after we had just had Jason Kelly, and he had some radical ideas. And I would love your reactions. He was talking about some city, it doesn't have to be state, some city, Cambridge could do it, should have some zone of autonomous only cars, or some element of robots are going to need some regulation. Like, can I just send my Unitree robot down to Whole Foods? Is that okay? Right? And right now it's an uncertain regulatory environment when it comes to autonomous driving and robots. You guys thinking about this type of stuff? Like, I'm just curious.
I wasn't there when Cambridge, so Jason will tell you a story that I imagine is true, that Cambridge regulatory environment in bioengineering was the reason why world leaders in that field came together in Cambridge and it basically built the biotech industry. I think there probably were a lot of ingredients, and I think I was one of many of those ingredients, but it does matter, particularly because there's no question that bad regulation can get in the way, right? We need to think about ethical AI at a state level. It's really important. I actually think every individual in the AI ecosystem has a responsibility to think about ethical AI. But in the name of ethical AI, you can actually really get in the way of innovation in AI, right? And so we have to be very careful that we're not putting out regulation that is well-intentioned around ethical that ultimately undermines our opportunity to innovate there. But for sure, you're talking about, and Jason's talking about experiments and learnings that we could potentially use to innovate as an economy. And we are constantly talking about those
magnets,
things.
Things that attract companies to come.
Absolutely. And to be fair, I just want to put out there, it's tricky. And part of the reason it's tricky, people get frustrated with government. They think, government goes very slowly. And as an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, now that I'm on the other side, I think one of the things people lose track of is when you start a tech company, you figure out your ICP, right? Your initial customer profile. You kind of push away everything else. You don't care about serving if you do it right, you don't care about serving anyone else. You win by being better at serving that ICP than anyone else in the world. So you define an ICP that probably not everyone is, maybe people are serving in a much broader way, but not really focused on serving better than anyone else. You go into that space and you do it better than anyone. Government can't do that. Right. So I advise that on every single board and to every single entrepreneur I've ever worked with. We have stakeholders that matter. Every stakeholder matters. Doesn't mean ultimately everyone's opinion counts the same, because we do have to lead and we do ultimately have to serve the population the best we can. And you can't do that by just being paralyzed by every different stakeholder's differences of opinion. But we also have to listen to those, and we have to care, and we have to integrate them into our thinking and decision making. And so that's by design a deliberative process. It means that government can't go as fast as the private sector in many, many things, right? It isn't like China with centralized planning where you just say, well, we've made a decision, we're just going to push everything else aside. It's why we don't have, high-speed rail at the level we'd all like, right? Because the stakeholders who eminent domain would be required to take their homes, they should have a voice, right? Environmental viewpoints need to be considered, right? There's a lot at stake that isn't just we'd like high-speed rail. It's frustrating because I really would like high-speed rail. So likewise, on all of these experiments, there is an opportunity. There's a lot we are thinking about and considering, but trying to figure out how we balance all the different stakeholders is definitely a key challenge.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
This has been really great. I think we'll probably, maybe ask you two quick questions. Sure. Who else should we have on the pod? You said we should keep telling stories. Like, whose story would
I definitely would get Will Ahmed.
Yeah.
I think that'd be a great one to get on here. I think it's Brian Howling going to be fascinating. He'll give you some different points of view. I think we agree on a lot of things too. I think a lot of what we need to figure out in Massachusetts is how do we do a better job keeping 22 to 35-year-olds here? I think we do that by helping them understand what we have to offer better. I think Brian, I think has some different views on that, and that's fine. But we still agree that talent base is critically important to the state. Who else? I mean, honestly, Dharmesh would be fascinating to have on as well. Who else comes to mind? Ryland Hamilton comes to mind as a fascinating entrepreneur doing incredible stuff at the edge of defense and AI. I don't know how well you guys know what he's up to with Blue Water Autonomy.
Yeah, he's going to join one of our dinners.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
He would be a great entrepreneur. He's he's won multiple times as an entrepreneur. He would be fascinating. I think Ty Brady would be an interesting person to get on. Amazon is the biggest scale producer of robots, at least in the US, maybe in the world, and they produce every single robot here in Massachusetts. Awesome. So when people say, I don't know about manufacturing Massachusetts, it's expensive. Amazon is a very cost optimized company, but what they realize is, what is the input that matters most to your success? If the input that matters most to your success is the most commoditized inputs, it may be Massachusetts is not as competitive. If you're literally talking about cardboard boxes only, you might choose to do that elsewhere. But when it's engineering input, when it's talent around automation, workforce automation skills, advanced manufacturing, we are uniquely good. So think about like one of the most sophisticated companies in the world who is really good at cost optimization, understanding which inputs matter the most and choosing Massachusetts for that scale production, right? He would be very interesting. There are so many great people to have on. I think Mikey Schulman would be great to have on. Dave Frankel, my partner at Founder Collective, would be a really interesting person for you guys to have on. And you look around that AI coalition, there are a lot of interesting people to talk to.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We will reach out to them for sure.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. You're talking to younger you, giving them one piece of advice right now for founding a company. What would it be?
One piece of advice is, you always believe there's somebody who knows better, that there are adults out there. And I think your job is to dispel the notion that there is a single person who knows better. Be curious, be inquisitive, learn from others, be open to input, but don't be impressionable. At the end of the day, there are no adults. There is no one on difficult challenges who really knows the answer. My joke now is I'm wearing a tie. I'm not today, but for the first time in my career, I go a lot of places wearing a tie, and I'm only pretending to look like an adult. I don't know the answers. I'm trying my very best to figure it out. And the best performers I've ever seen are people who take agency for that responsibility, but are heat-sinking missiles for learning. They're incredible at learning while also owning that ultimately they've got to decide. And there isn't a single person who just knows the answers. It's never like that. I'd also say beware the people who tell you they know all the answers. That's very dangerous.
So Eric, one of the things that I think weighs on a lot of us entrepreneurs that we're working in AI, we're seeing, we develop software. We're seeing these AI models be able to just like do what used to be our job. And in some ways, like you said earlier in the pod, that's very liberating. It gets you to focus on some of the critical things. But there's a lot more discourse now around just like what white collar jobs, like how is this going to change? And if there may be a future where there's way fewer jobs. There may be a future where there's way more jobs. But either way, it feels like there might be a dislocation that's uncomfortable. How does the state think about that? What's its role? What should other states be doing?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I'll first start by saying I'm an AI optimist, right? And I'm not just an optimist because I want to be an optimist. I look at the history of productivity tools from the printing press, the calculator, the computer, email, and you do see displacement. Right? There are moments of displacement that are hard, and you really have to think about how do you address those issues at a workforce level. At the same time, I'm a believer that 10 years from now, we will have lower unemployment than we have today. Right? And I think that's the history of productivity. As human capabilities improve, humans become more valuable. As humans become more valuable, there's more demand for work. And we have relatively, generationally, historic low unemployment right now, even though we have greater productivity than we've ever had before. There are numerous explanations for that. I always tell the story, my great-grandfather plucked chickens in New York City, and then he cut fabrics in the garment district after he first came to the U.S. My grandmother, when she went back to work as a widow, she hadn't worked in years and years. She was a switchboard operator. I had an uncle, actually spoke to him this week. I have an uncle who, when he started his career, was an elevator operator. Cool. We just talked about hundreds of thousands of jobs over decades that none of those jobs exist today, not a single one. And yet the economy shifts and adapts. Law firms used to do extraordinary amounts of research before LexisNexis came to bear. Extraordinary. Yet they have more lawyers than ever. How is that, right? Well, standards go up. Some of this work becomes easy, and people focus their energies in other places. And it creates more productivity per lawyer than it did just trying to research legal history, right? As an example. There's something called Jevons paradox. Gary Tan did a really nice piece on this from Y Combinator. But effectively what it says is, as the cost of capability goes down, which is really what we're talking about, the cost of, or you think if somebody's productivity goes up, their productive unit is less expensive as their productivity goes up. Demand for that unit goes up. So one of the fallacies that we talk about a lot when we're worried about extraordinary job loss due to AI is this premise, right, that the amount of work that needs to get done is somehow fixed. That a company, if they're spending, let's say, 100 units on labor, that if you were to literally cut in half the amount of labor needed to produce that 100 units, you could just get rid of half the workforce. But the reality is, if on the expense side of the ledger, right, you had all that extra capacity and you can grow your business because of that capacity, you will. Right. And so I look at, we're rolling out AI in government. I couldn't tell you right now how I'd replace a single job in our office. We have so much demand for our services. The demand is extraordinary. Ultimately, if we can serve more people better, faster, and with more attention, that is incredibly valuable to what we're trying to do. And I think it's a good example of Jevons paradox, right? Which is the demand for those services as they get easier to produce goes up. We can provide more. And I think we're ultimately going to see that across the economy. And I think that's been the history of what we see with productivity tools.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to think about is, and the Iceberg Project at MIT talks about this, Brookings Institution recently published on this, but I've been saying this for a while. It's good to see some publications talk about this, which is AI is very good at specific skills, but it's not actually that good at bundles of skills, which is really what jobs are. So you can design AI to drive a vehicle, which, by the way, turns out by itself to be very hard to do. But if you need somebody also to go shopping in the store, to put things in the vehicle to bring to somebody, AI is not that good at that. And when you talk about white-collar jobs, I actually really think most white-collar jobs are bundles of skills. They're not singular skills. I also don't know that I believe that the white-collar workforce is affected so differently than the blue-collar workforce. You know, I think if you take a novice electrician, they may be able to do the work of a master electrician with AR goggles and AI, because all of a sudden you can have a coach right there supporting you, and you can do much more advanced work. So I think it's going to level up everybody. My biggest concern for the workforce is, if, you know, people say this a lot, but ultimately, if you are not learning these skills, you are becoming less productive. If you are becoming less productive, you are less valuable. It's a global economy. We cannot thrive if we are not at the forefront of productivity for all of our workers. We need our workforce. This is why we're trying to make AI training available to everybody. We need our workforce to level up. We need our small businesses to enable their workers to level up. We need manufacturing organizations. Everybody needs to be learning these skills, because that's how we succeed. Nobody wants to hire someone today who doesn't know how to use email or a computer or the internet. And that's across the spectrum. You can get back to electricians. You may not need the internet much, but you need it for all your scheduling. You need it for all your updates. I mean, it might all be on mobile. But you have to use these tools, right? And when you get really flummoxed because you've never seen something before, you know, you may try to look that up. And it's way easier to do that today with AI than it is by trying to go deep on Reddit or something. So, or in the manual of the thing you're trying to service. And so I think we really need that skill development. And I am certain that the highest risk to our workforce is folks who are putting their heads in the sand or encouraging others to put their heads in the sand and afraid to learn these skills. I would say, don't be afraid, lean in. It's what makes us all more valuable every day.
I definitely have to 100% agree that like being adaptable and curious right now is rewarded more than ever. I do still worry, I think, around the AIs won't be able to do a combination of skills. I think the same paradox that Gary Tan mentions is like, it's coherent with what we saw with locomotion, right? That like we had lots of horses, then we had cars, and cars drove up the demand for locomotion immensely because it became so cheap. But like the horses didn't learn how to drive the cars. And I think our goal is to, be adaptable so that we're not stuck in that spot where we are getting, disrupted by something. And I think it feels very uncertain. Like when you're down at the ground level, like it feels very uncertain when you see the pace and trying to like extrapolate out. And so I do think, I think it's worth our time to think about, well, what if these things, what if the dislocation is very hard? Like what is our plan? How do we make sure we
There's
react
almost
fast?
no sector that historically has not had productivity gains through advancement of technology. There's almost no sector, whether it's carpentry or it's, you can pick any single sector. You have to learn these tools. Plumbing has actually had a lot of advancement. If you do not use these tools, you become expensive, you become worse at what you do, you become less valuable. So that's always been true. You could say it's accelerating faster than ever. It probably is. But I think the primary thing is, when people master these tools, they become way more valuable and they bring way more skill to bear. So there will be displacement. You think of toll operators versus Easy Pass. And I think on some level, even though obviously it's very hard to transition and have that example, at some level, the population has massively benefit. I used to wait 30 minutes on the Throgs Neck Bridge and 30 minutes at the George Washington Bridge just to visit my girlfriend who became my wife every single time, right? And we still have traffic, but we don't wait at bridge crossings the way we used to, or entry the way we used to. And so the population massively benefits. But the other thing that happens is nobody seems to envision the jobs that will be created that change. And that happens also. And so I am ultimately a believer that human capability continues to grow and expand. I do not believe AI is better than humans at everything. It's better at certain things. By the way, if you're really afraid of that, I always give the example, but the calculator should have scared you more than anything. For $10 in your hand, powered by the sun for decades now, it can do things no human can do.
Yeah. Eric, thank you so much for being on the pod.
No,
really appreciate it.
Love what you're doing.
We love what you're doing with the government. We love the AI Coalition. Appreciate you coming on the pod. Thank you very much.